City of Stevens Point Plan Commission meeting, recorded September 8, 2020.
I have 6 o'clock. I will call the regular Plan Commission meeting to order. Yeah, let's see. We are recording, and we've got all of our commissioners. Director Konoski, would you like to call the roll, please?
Weeza.
Here.
Kneebone.
Here.
Artson.
Here.
Cooper.
Here.
Haynes.
Here.
Hoppy.
Here.
Rice.
Here.
7-0. We have a quorum.
Perfect. Director Konoski, you're going to have to kind of keep an eye on things. I'm going to ask that everybody put your phones or microphones on mute unless you are speaking. It creates quite a distraction for everyone else if we don't. If you need to speak, you have a virtual hand you can raise. If you're participating via video, you can wave your hand. Director Konoski is in charge of the meeting, so he'll be the one responsible for going through and making sure that anybody who needs to speak has an opportunity to. If you are joining us only by phone, we'll have an opportunity for you to take your phone off of mute, identify who you are, and then give you the opportunity to speak on any given agenda item. Are there any questions about protocol for the Zoom meetings? Okay. Then item number 1 is the report from our August 3rd meeting of the Plan Commission. Those minutes were included in your packet. Commissioners, any thoughts or a motion?
This is Cooper. I'll move approval of those minutes as presented.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Haynes. One other thing, when you speak, please identify yourself before speaking. It just helps kind of keep the flow of things and everybody knows who's talking. So I appreciate that. We have a motion to accept those minutes and actions. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please unmute yourself and signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that is approved.
This is Commissioner Hoppy. I just have a technical thing, possibly
Sure.
for Mr. Konoski. Is there a way to go full screen on your, or present type screen on your presentation? Just because I'm getting the two side by side and I'm trying to have the agenda on half the screen, and I don't have a 60-inch laptop, so.
Oh, sorry. I thought I was sharing.
60 screen laptop. So you
that?
were, but you're there. That's better. Okay.
Okay, sorry. I thought that was on the screen, but my apologies.
Nope, we're good.
Okay, it was on the screen, but it was only on part of the screen.
Yeah, it was kind of the, I don't know, goofy how PowerPoint does it. I mean.
Okay. All right, good. Next item is item number 2, and that's a public hearing and subsequent action on a request from Norm Myers Jr. for a conditional use permit to allow more than one principal structure and use the property at 1417 Church Street, parcel identified in the agenda. Director Konoski?
Thank you. So before you tonight is a request for a conditional use permit to allow more than one principal structure and one principal use on one official lot of record within the city of Stevens Point. Within our zoning code, anytime you have more than one principal use on a lot, it does require a conditional use permit to be requested and obtained by the applicant. In this specific instance, the applicant lives in what is the former parlor area of the church at 1417 Church Street. Also within that specific property, there's the former, I believe it's the former rectory, which is where historically priests of the church or clergy of the church had resided. Right now, the applicant utilizes the rectory as a rental unit, a single family rental unit, and then the applicant resides within the church itself on the north side in the 1951 edition. So when it came to staff's attention, there were really two issues that we were working through. The first and foremost being working through some of the zoning requirements to bring the property into compliance. Again, the two principal structures on one lot, and having two of the same or two principal uses on a lot, and then of course bring the church structure in compliance with UDC. Right now, it meets a lot of commercial building code requirements. There are some residential building code requirements the applicant will have to meet at some point. As outlined within the PowerPoint here, the request does not alter any existing performance standards. Things like setbacks, building height, things of that nature are already existing on the property, and therefore there's no concerns from what we'll call the performance standards. We don't staff from our perspective. If you take a look at the use itself, it's less intrusive on the surrounding neighborhood than what would be considered an institutional use like a church, the single family use. And so it acts as a quasi buffer between the higher density residential properties that are south and then the more commercialized properties on the north side. And then one thing that we typically try to do in these things in these situations is there a way for us to rezone the property or bring it further into compliance with the city's comprehensive plan? Given that staff's preferred route in the future land use plan, and we'll get into this a little later in some of the conditions that we put on it, we would like to see this property remain as institutional or government. So in the event that the current property owner would ever decide to sell the property for an institutional use like a church or anything else of that nature, it would be compliant with the zoning code. This would also prevent them from doing any major expansions on the property and really, for lack of a better term, ties their hands in what they can do down the road with the property itself. Again, the rectory has been used historically for residential use. The property is owned R5, which are multiple family 2 residential property. Again, multiple family, you've got two principal structures that are being used for two principal uses, and that's why the permit is before you tonight. So outlined on the screen right now, you can see where the church is located. This is technically one lot. So the house is right here, that's zoned R4, which is our multiple family 1 residential. The church itself is zoned R5, which is our multiple family 2 residential. R5 is intended to be a higher density use than an R4 and R3. To the west, you have B3 zoning, which serves as a quasi-transitional zoning, something similar to what you would see when you come into the downtown area in that type of zoning district. To the east, you do have R4. South, you've got additional R5 property and B3 property. So it's not out of the realm. We're not asking for a rezoning. It's just identifying the use via conditional use. These are photos of the property. The photo in the lower left-hand corner is the rectory. That's where the applicant rents this facility or this specific structure out to a single family use. You can't see it. Behind these two evergreen trees here, you do have what I'll call the north parlor, the parish hall, built, my apologies, I think it's in 51 earlier, it's actually 1915. That's where the applicant resides. The church structure, the former church structure itself is not utilized by the applicant for any residential purposes. This church has a long history in the city itself, and unfortunately they were unable to repair some of the structural concerns that were brought up a number of years ago and ended up selling the church for that. You can see back here in the upper left-hand corner, this is one of the main entrances into the 1915 edition where the applicant resides. Again, this is actually one lot. It's in two zoning lots, but one lot itself. So staff, based on the recommendations, the 14 conditions, standards that would be provided or reviewed by the Plan Commission when reviewing conditional use permits, would recommend approval to allow more than one principal structure and use on one lot at 1417 Church Street. There are three significant conditions that should be addressed one by one. So first and foremost, the applicable building permits shall be applied for and obtained prior to commencement of construction. That's kind of a standard language one. The improvements required by the city building inspector to change the building use of the property shall be completed within 12 months of the issuance of the building permit. Typically, we wouldn't put this kind of condition on, but however, because the church was utilized and was built to commercial standards, staff did feel as though it was necessary to impose some of these restrictions on it, saying, okay, you need to bring it into residential use, and that includes the building permit and the building itself. You have 12 months to do that. Failure for the applicant to meet that condition will null and void the conditional use permit, and therefore the property would be in violation. We could follow suit for what we typically would do in these situations. The single-family residential use at 1417 Church Street shall be occupied by the applicant, meaning that if the applicant would leave the property, would move to another location, they could not rent the church facility out as a residential property. That is something that staff felt was really important. If we're not going to be changing the zoning and we're not going to be changing the comprehensive plan land use designation of this property, we felt it was really relevant to ensure that the applicant can use the property as they see fit for owner occupancy. However, they cannot rent out the church to a family, or they cannot rent out the rectory and the church, things of that nature. And then the single family residential use at both the Church Street property and the Ellis Street property shall be allowed. Other uses would have to come back before Plan Commission, anything like that, pretty standard zoning language. So with those three conditions, staff would recommend approval. I believe the applicant is on the line and could answer any questions. Otherwise, Mr. Mayor, I advise that we continue with the public hearing.
Thank you very much. Before we continue on the public hearing, are there any commissioners that have clarifying questions for the director? Just the director at this point. Commissioner Hoppy.
Commissioner Hoppy, just one question about, and maybe it's clarified by the third bullet point, but what would they be able to, say, tear down the church and build kind of a single family, more traditional type home there? Would this conditional use limit that possibility?
So within our zoning code, we do require that in the R5 or multiple family 2 residential that they obtain a separate conditional use permit. And so if they were to tear the church down or anything like that and build single family, they would require a conditional use permit that would address both the multiple dwellings in one zoning lot and the fact that they are building a single family house.
Okay. Any other commissioners? Okay, seeing none, I will declare the public hearing open. Anyone wishing to offer testimony from the public regarding this request is urged to provide that testimony now. And since most of the public is there on phone, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, this is Dr. Jennifer Peglow at 1501 Plover Street.
Hello, go ahead.
Yes. Just a couple of questions regarding the number of occupants that are going to be allowed in these two buildings. As I understand it, it is rental property, but as stated, it is owner occupant. So how many rentals within those buildings are we talking? Because one of my major concerns is parking in the area. There is no parking lot or parking structure for those buildings currently. And with the school, as well as a lot of the residents utilizing street parking already in that area, I'm just concerned about additional street congestion.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Peglow. This is a public hearing, so I'm going to have the director wait till the end and answer your questions for you. I saw the director taking notes, so we'll be sure and answer that question as soon as the public hearing is open, Dr. Peglow, or closed rather.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else wishing to offer testimony during the public hearing?
Yeah, Bob Weir, 727 Second Street.
Go ahead. Yes.
Okay. I'm not positive exactly what was discussed, but about 5 or 6 years ago, when I was on the Historic Preservation Commission, we did have a hearing, and we played the Historic Preservation Commission discussed. I think it was primarily about replacing the roof, but I'm not absolutely certain about it. But the entire structure, including the annex, and I believe the residence to the east of the church was discussed, and there were some conditions placed on the structure. I think it was primarily the church and the annex to the north, where the applicant is residing now, apparently. I'm just wondering whether staff has researched that issue, and it would be in the minutes from the Historic Preservation Commission, like I say, maybe 5 or 6 years ago.
Thank you, Mr. Ware. Anyone else wishing to offer testimony? Public hearing remains open. We have Alderperson Tori Jennings.
Thank you. Staff's omission of this applicant's track record is a bit concerning to me. It's leaving Plan Commission with unaware of this individual's track record with historic buildings and also foreclosures, and making historic and other buildings uninhabitable. I realize that anything discussed needs to pertain strictly to the application before us and the conditional use. But the individuals have already been living in the building, not complying. So I guess one of the questions I have is, why is this coming forward now when the building's been lived in for at least a year? I'll just conclude by saying this is an unusual application, and it's difficult to believe that this applicant moved into a church assuming that they could just live in there. So I will turn that over to Plan Commission to think about, but I do hope you're aware of the history of this applicant. Thank you.
Thank you. Public hearing is still open. Public hearing remains open. For the third and final time, the public hearing is open. Seeing no indication of anyone else wishing to testify during the public hearing, I'm going to declare the public hearing closed, and we will bring it back to the commissioners. But before we do that, I'm going to turn it back over to Director Konoski to answer Dr. Peglow's question. And any insight you can shed. I think several of us on the Plan Commission know the history that this applicant has with other properties, including one that was a former church. But we can't directly relate it to this particular conditional use. But Director, if you could answer Dr. Peglow's questions, and then we'll have a discussion on the rest.
Sure. So regarding the question about the number of individuals or the number of occupants, our zoning code only defines family as no more than 2 unrelated individuals, and that's been a topic of conversation with this body for several years. For example, the applicant could rent out the former rectory to 2 unrelated individuals, but they couldn't rent it out to a foursome of students, for example. You can have as many blood-related family members in a unit that's deemed appropriate via the UDC. So there could be any number of individuals, as long as they're all related. The city wouldn't regulate that. In the church, kind of the same story. As long as you don't have any more than 2 unrelated individuals, that can be counted as one a unit itself. As it relates to parking, I pulled this up here. The applicant who lives in the church parks their vehicles off of Ellis Street on this area. This used to be a handicap parking area for the church. This church itself,
Well, Director, I think Dr. Peglow is joining us by phone, so she can't see the PowerPoint.
Oh, my apologies.
It looks like there's room for about 6 vehicles in that driveway area. Is that correct with your assessment?
And then there's another driveway and garage located north of the rectory, and that's currently utilized by the tenants who live in the single family house that's on the property. As it relates to Mr. Weir's comments, yes, Historic Preservation did review. There was a request. There were orders out to repair the roof on the property a number of years ago. That still has not been resolved. for whatever purpose or whatever reason. The city's building inspection department is aware of the concerns of the condition of the roof, and will follow up as we have been doing more lately when we issue orders. Relating to Alder Jennings' comments, you know, I as staff, I don't necessarily feel comfortable including history of the applicant in these types of situations, and I would defer to Attorney Beveridge's expertise on whether or not that should be or should not be included. But as it relates to the applicant, the city found out, or we noticed that he was occupying the space, I would say probably at least 6 months ago, and through that time have been working with the applicant to bring him into compliance. You know, working through the zoning process, identifying, okay, where exactly is he living? You know, we don't go out of our way to try to track down what exactly is going on. If we notice something that is occurring, or if someone notifies us that the applicant would be living in the property, that's when we do kind of these follow-ups. So that's all what I'll speak to that. I don't know if Mayor, if you want to have Attorney Beveridge speak to the track record of the applicant and whether or not that should or should not be included as part of the public record.
Sure, we can let Attorney Beveridge chime in, but I'm going to tell you that, Commissioners, you have conditions or standards of review that need to be met or not met based in your estimation. I would think that the likelihood of compliance with those standards of review could be taken under consideration in this particular case, but I would defer again to Attorney Beveridge. Logan, do you have anything you can add?
Well, a track record of operations of an applicant for a conditional use permit certainly can be taken into consideration if it's relevant to whether or not you can reasonably expect compliance with conditions. You know, for example, you know, a very different context, taverns are a conditional use in every zoning district. If an applicant formerly had owned a tavern that had all kinds of noise issues or complaints from neighbors about, impacts to adjoining properties, that certainly could be taken into consideration when evaluating that prong of a new application for a similar type of use. So this is no different. It's up to the members of the commission to look at the record before them and decide whether they view information relating to Mr. Meyer's past properties that he's owned, and decide whether they feel that there is anything there which is relevant and touches upon those particular factors.
Thank you. I see a phone number that I don't recognize. Mr. Meyer, is that you on the line? See a 414 area code. Is that the applicant? Okay, so since I didn't hear anything, I'm going to assume that the applicant is not present to defend themselves. Commissioners?
Mayor, Mike?
Yes?
This is Joe Schoenberg, the 414.
Oh, thanks, Joe. I appreciate it.
No problem. Okay.
All right, so confirmation that the applicant is not here to testify on their behalf. Commissioners, thoughts, questions?
This is Cooper. I have a question for the director.
Absolutely.
Director Kanowski, in your opinion, is there any value to making this conditional use permit only a year and then revisiting it, or are we, are we just kicking a can down a road, or what's your opinion on that?
That's a tough spot to put them in. I would say that we have conditions on there that must be met. They have a time frame for those conditions to be met. If they are not, the conditional use is revoked or not allowed. If we'd like to put some additional conditions on there with a time frame, we could certainly do that, but having the conditional use expire or be reviewed at a certain time, I would say is not appropriate. We should put the conditions on. If the conditions are met, the applicant gets his conditional use permit. If they are not met, we pull it. I will say this, that this applicant's track record with properties in the city and very likely outside the city is not a good one. There's the dance studio on Strong's Avenue that I believe is currently being considered for a tax deed parcel, meaning that the county's going to take it back for non-payment of taxes. There's several other properties in the city from this particular owner. What I would say is that this church needs work. That's the reason the previous owners sold it. They couldn't afford to make those repairs. I think it's critical that those repairs are made, and our city inspection department will be following up on that with the same enthusiasm that we would anywhere else. We don't want this historic building to fall into such disrepair as the former convent or the Fox Theater, for example, and we have to wind up raising it or something. I can tell you that having someone in there provides a certain amount of general maintenance. Having no one in there can create other problems. And I'll just leave my comment at that. If the commission would like to put any additional comments on, with or without timeframes, that is certainly within your purview.
Mr. Cooper, just to kind of piggyback off of the mayor's comments, I personally don't care for putting sunset clauses and conditional uses unless the use is more intense than what typically would be allowed. And that's why I typically say, even after a year, honestly, I don't think maybe a year's worth of conditional use or that specific use necessarily provides us a full scope of what that specific use will do to that neighborhood or things of that nature. Tourist rooming houses, I think that's a different story, that those specifically should have some sunset clause and should come back up every year for consideration, either by staff or by the commission. Because this use is technically, in the eyes of zoning, less intense than a traditional institutional church use, I don't necessarily advise the Plan Commission on putting that in there. Again, the three conditions that are outlined on the screen right now, I think cover us pretty well, that if the applicant fails to meet one of the conditions or the applicant decides to move, they would have to go through this process again in order for them to obtain the conditional use permit. And let's say condition one, that they don't, complete all appropriate repairs within 12 months, and we pull the conditional use and they have to go through this process again. Bingo, there's your reason for denial. You've got justification. You didn't follow your last conditional use permit to the T as intended. So, we will be keeping an eye out on that as we go through the remodeling of that specific property.
So clarification, Commissioner Hoppy. So just again, going to condition one, the improvements required by the city building inspector, does that include the roof for that within 12 months, or is that something, what's overlaid again on that with that?
It would really depend on what exactly the order that was given out 5 or 6 years ago says. On major projects, whether it's a church, a former church, or whether it's a small single family home, city building inspection understands the sometimes financial hardship that comes with replacing roofs or siding. And so we do try to work with applicants as much as possible. If someone says to us, hey, we need a year to make this work, we will essentially make them come in and sign an agreement with the city saying, I will have this replaced in a year, or I will have the issues that have been identified by the city building inspector repaired or replaced within a year. We do work with the applicants on things like that. The use,
but sorry, just within that condition, at least we have eyes on the applicant is basically the idea as well, that
correct.
We're not putting that condition in and then not having eyes on the situation for 3 years, 4 years.
Yeah, the majority of our concern is based on some of the interior, the life safety aspects of going from a commercial use to a residential use. And so that's where most of this condition was intended to be focused. The exterior items are definitely something that we're going to have to take into consideration, but we'll work with the applicant as much as possible.
Yeah, the roof, I believe, is pretty critical. I mean, you saw what happened in some of the other buildings in town where the roof gets neglected, water gets in, and before you know it, we're having to tear it down. So, Director, I want to make sure that our inspectors are aware of that, and they do their due diligence when assessing the deed. Again, Commissioners, thoughts, comments, or a motion?
I got a question. Commissioner Aronson, I'm trying to work through some of this stuff that it's kind of new, just a recent consideration, but the current owner is familiar with the process of purchasing properties, and so maybe he should have known what is and is not allowed, and he purchased the property, I assume, and then moved in and then started renting part of the property. Is it plausible that he would claim ignorance of the process and that, gee, I didn't know type of thing? I guess I don't have a problem with somebody buying a church and thinking they can move into it, considering it was a habitation and there's a habitation next door that you know, is kind of laid out and seems reasonable. But if you lose that innocent landowner type thing, that could affect a decision, I guess. Is that a valid consideration, I guess, at all? Maybe check with Attorney Beveridge.
So I don't think that the reason he hasn't applied for a conditional use permit to date would really come into play. You know, I know he's a property owner throughout the city. This shouldn't be a surprise. Attorney Beveridge, do you have anything you want to weigh in here?
I guess I'm not entirely sure I understood the question, other than to say that you know, technically they was using the property in violation. However, it's not unheard of for us to identify a zoning violation, especially in the context of a conditional use permit that needs to be applied for, and just contact the property owner. And so long as they initiate that process, we essentially treat it as a non-enforcement, i.e. we're not going to issue citations or anything like that as long as somebody's cooperative. But like I said, I'm not quite sure I exactly understood what Commissioner Aronson was trying to ask there.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure either, but I'm just, again, thinking that the property was purchased with some knowledge of its status and potential uses and whatnot. And when the property was purchased, I presume there weren't any conditions or anything laid on the purchaser that needing to do, let's say, improvements and whatnot. And so he purchased it and then moved in and started using it. Should he have known better? Again, there's just something there that I'm not entirely comfortable with. It seems a little premeditated, and it's like if you start doing something and then you get caught doing it, well, then they're going to make you fix it. And I don't know that I'm entirely bad with that either, but if that's the situation, I'm just looking for clarification, I guess.
And Commissioner, whether or not the applicant knew or suspected they needed a conditional use permit, I would say it is almost irrelevant in this particular application. He is now aware of it. He's made the application to the city. It's up to us to determine whether or not we would allow that based on the standards of review. And if we are to allow it, what, if any, conditions and timeframes are we going to put on those to allow it? Does that make sense?
I think so. I think so. And I think I could look past the issue of, you know, how he's handled other properties. And if this was just somebody going in there, I don't know that I'd have a problem with it. And with the conditions, I do hear what you're saying about you don't want somebody to purchase it and then just let it go into disrepair. And if the condition is that they are required to do the necessary repairs, I think that's the important thing. So I just had to kind of talk that out and think that out on my own. I think I'm good.
Okay.
Thanks.
And so what I'll continue to add is that based on the historic preservation order, and if there is an existing order on the roof, or if there is a future order on the roof or any other piece of the structure, that would fall under the first condition. So they would need to make any of those repairs within the 12 months to continue to occupy that building.
Are there existing conditions, or does not the historical preservation folks make those make them conditions, but rather just comment on them? Again, is this something he knew about going in?
So the conditions aren't placed necessarily by the Historic Preservation and Design Review. That would be done by our inspection department. And I use the condition word because you used it, but really it would be orders for repair.
So typically properties that fall within like the downtown historic district, of which this property does, anytime they do, like a good example is on where the applicant actually lives, there's a metal roof there. And so that metal roof is in good shape. However, because it's connected to the church property, the former church and the sanctuary, the chapel, that area, that roof does need to be replaced. Those orders are issued by the city building inspection department. Now, the applicant will likely have to go through the historic preservation process in order to obtain a permit to, because we're looking for what's called a certificate of compliance, wherein the applicant will keep with the historic nature of that property. Because it is a historic commercially used property, we will probably have to be reviewing that as well. So the building inspector, the building inspection department will issue the orders. Through the order issuance process, the applicant will have to go through historic preservation, who is going to look at things like style of shingle, color of shingle, that type of thing. Not necessarily, hey, that roof's in really bad shape, you need to issue the raise, or you need to issue, not the raise order, you need to issue the order to correct the violation. That's outside the purview of both this body and historic preservation and falls solely within the building inspection department.
Have any orders been issued for this property? I guess I'm a little unclear on that.
There were orders issued a number of years ago under previous building inspectors. Those orders have not been followed through upon. DJ and I did speak about this a number of times, and we will work with the applicant to either reissue the orders and then follow up on the orders. But essentially, it's no different than, a good example is the Stoic Plumbing building. The raise order on that initially was issued in 1985, but the inspection department never followed up on it, and it's 2020 and the building is still standing. So if you don't have an inspector who's willing to follow up on the orders they issue, the orders more or less become null and void. So now we have to go through the process of the inspection department doing the inspection, deeming that something has to be done, and issuing new orders and giving a specific timeline on those orders to be followed through.
And we will be doing that.
Correct.
All right, commissioners, any other questions, comments, or motion? Commissioner Cooper, was that a hand or were you just? Yeah.
I'll do me bone here.
I will.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to make a motion to approve the conditional use permit with the staff recommended conditions.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Kneebone here, I'll second that.
And we have a motion and a second to approve the conditional use with the staff recommended conditions. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, please unmute yourselves, commissioners. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any commissioners opposed? Hearing none, the motion is passed and the conditional use will move on to the common council.
Sorry, I didn't unmute myself, but I said nay because I'm not entirely comfortable with it. But
I apologize, Commissioner Arnson. I didn't see the lips moving or anything either.
yeah, no, I missed it. But so I vote nay on this one.
Okay, let the record show that Commissioner Arnson is in opposition. Thank you. Now, moving on to item number 3, which is a request from the Wisconsin Public Service Corporation for an easement to install a utility pole at the northeast corner of the municipal parking lot number 7. Director.
Before you tonight is a request from Wisconsin Public Service. They are seeking a 12 by 12 foot easement in the northeast corner of municipal parking lot number 7 to install a utility pole and guy wiring. The purpose of that is to underground the utilities to cross 3rd Street and service the Berkshire Senior Housing Project. I will be honest, this has been a battle between city staff and Wisconsin Public Service, and this is actually the least intrusive easement agreement that we came to with Wisconsin Public Service in order to provide the services to Berkshire Senior Housing. We believe that this was absolutely the best option for the city to pursue, and thankfully, through working with Wisconsin Public Service and some of their staff members, got them to join us in that endeavor. So with that, and before you tonight is a request for the easement itself. The easement agreement is within your agenda packet. Staff would recommend approval as presented. There will be a small fee for purchase of that easement, just over $1,000 by Wisconsin Public Service, and that's standard throughout whenever we provide one-time perpetual easement or one-time easements in this specific instance where it's serving one customer.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, any initial thoughts? And I'll go to the public.
Alder Nebone here. I have a quick question. I know that Ruby, is that going to affect Ruby's ability to do their seating outside, or will they
Nope.
be able to work around that?
So that's a different area. So if you look on the screen where the shadow boxes, it says approximate easement area.
Right.
That's where the seating is. The highlighted area in yellow.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Is where the actual easement will be.
Great. Thanks.
No problem. Any comments from the public? Not seeing anything. Okay, then I will bring it back. Commissioners, what are your wishes?
Just one other question. I'm blanking a little bit, but is there a tree there? Is that going to be affected, I guess, as well?
The tree itself is, yeah, it does. There's a tree there. It does exist, and it's a nice large tree. We are hopeful that the utility pole itself can be put as much into the northeast corner of the easement area as possible, and that the 2 guy wires are going to be able to go south and west, avoiding the tree. We're going to work with public service as much as possible to prevent them from taking that tree down.
Okay.
Any other comments or a motion? Commissioner Cooper, you are on the ball.
I'll move approval of the easement as presented.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Commissioner Happy, I'll second.
Okay, we'll give the, I know Anna Haynes, Commissioner Haynes had jumped in too, but we'll give the second to Commissioner Hoppy. Any discussion? Hearing none, commissioners, please unmute yourselves. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I'll ask again, any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Item number 4 is a request from the city of Stevens Point to sell 1116, 1124, and 1128 Main Street, also known as the former Fox Theater. Commissioners, whenever the city acquires or disposes of property, statute requires that the Plan Commission evaluate and weigh in on it. That's what you have before you here tonight. We have an accepted proposal to reestablish an use at the Fox Theater. and we need the Plan Commission's review to comply with the state statute. Director, anything to add?
Yeah, so there's kind of awkward back-to-back approvals here. The first one, the area in red, that's actually owned and titled by the city of Stevens Point. We're going to also, during the next agenda item, be approving the request from the Redevelopment Authority. The Redevelopment Authority technically owns this area back here. The city of Stevens Point technically owns this area up here. Technically, they are two separate bodies, but are part of the municipal corporation itself. Therefore, we're going to have two action items to sell the physical properties that currently exist, the Fox Theater, and then that additional area behind the Fox. And that's the next item on the Plan Commission's agenda. This is, as the mayor mentioned, in compliance with state statute for us to, as a body, the Plan Commission review disposition of property. Also, all three parties have signed the development agreement that's been approved by the Redevelopment Authority and the City Council. If you're seeking to derail the project, that probably wouldn't be in the best interest of the city at this time. So would recommend approval of selling the parcel identified within the packet.
And for those of you on the phone, subject to area A is what I'll call it, owned by the city, is what I would call the former building of the Fox Theater post 1990. The subject area B, which is the subject of the next agenda item, was part of the original Fox Theater property, and I would say that's pre-1980. So those are the two parcels, if you can kind of imagine those in your head, if you can't see the director's the screen. So are there comments regarding the request? We'll go to the public first. Seeing no one from the public wishing to speak, I'll bring it back to the commissioners. Commissioners, what are your wishes?
Commissioner Hoppy, I'd move approval of the request.
Thank you. Do we have a second? I'll second. Seconded by Weeza. Any discussion? Hearing none, please unmute yourselves, commissioners. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Seeing none, that motion is approved. Item number 5 is a request from the Redevelopment Authority of the City of Stevens Point to sell a portion of RA-owned property adjacent to Municipal Parking Lot 16. It's identified on our screen and in your packet. However, for those on the phone, as I said, this is currently an area of asphalt and green space that was behind the former Fox Theater structure. That came into the city when we purchased the mall property back. Prior to that, mall being built early 80s, it was part of the original Fox Theater property. Director, anything to add there?
Yeah, I would just add, those who are watching at home, actually, which I suppose is everybody, my photos did not properly transpose from the agenda packet. This is actually just a duplicate from the last item. The area that we're discussing is actually the area in blue. The area in red, the Plan Commission has just voted upon. So this is the area in blue for those who are watching at home.
Okay, any comments from the public? Seeing none, I will bring it back to the commissioners. Commissioners, same as before, this is a statutory review of the disposition of property, and we would be looking to approve this as well. What are your wishes?
I'd move to approve the request.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Arntzen. Is there a second?
Commissioner Hoppy, second.
Thank you very much. Discussion? Hearing none, commissioners, please unmute yourselves. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Seeing none, the motion is approved. Item number 6 is a request from the City of Stevens Point for a public utility easement for the installation and maintenance of stormwater infrastructure located in Lot 1 of an unrecorded certified survey map adjacent to 1116, 1124, and 1128 Main Street. Director.
So as we go through this process, essentially what the Plan Commission has approved is selling the two properties. The next step that the city will take is recording a certified survey map combining the two properties into one. That area is outlined in blue as a total property itself. As part of the redevelopment of the Fox, this is a little bit of a glimpse behind the magic curtain. You can see that the proposal is to install 4 parking stalls on this green space with some electric car charging stations, and then vacating or getting rid of this area back here, which is currently an asphalt access area for the Q Gallery and what was at the time the back of the Fox Theater. To address some of these stormwater issues that we have, especially behind the Q Gallery, there is an intention to install a stormwater basin here, a stormwater basin here, and one here as well. Everything from there will flow then south to catch up with the existing stormwater facilities that will pipe out to Main Street and down to the pipes below the dam. So with that, because this area is proposed to be a green space, the developer who the city is working with on redeveloping the Fox Theater property has agreed to provide a stormwater easement area. This includes access, things of that nature, and they will not build anything over it. The stage area that's proposed will be on either side of the easement, and so there's not going to be any structures or anything like that that are going to limit the city's ability to access the stormwater pipe when needed. So again, similar to the Wisconsin Public Service request, this request is before you anytime we provide an easement or anything of that nature to a party. We are going to essentially grant this easement to ourselves and then sell the property to the developer, so they really don't have much of a say other than they've agreed to that specific easement when they take the property. So would recommend approval.
Thank you. Yeah, pretty cut and dry. We need to make this happen. For those on the phone not being able to see the screen, or if you can't bring up the agenda on your computer, the easement runs basically parallel to Main Street behind what was the Fox Theater. Any comments from the public? Seeing no comments from the public, bring it back to the commissioners. Commissioner Arnson, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's any stormwater attenuation structures planned for this, or is it all just hard piped to the stormwater system?
There's going to be one additional inlet actually on the property itself. I forgot to mention, just a small one to help catch some additional stormwater that might be coming off of the back of the property. But in terms of any detention systems or anything like that, no. When you start getting into the downtown area where we have a significant amount of impervious surface, a lot of times most of our stormwater goes into a catch basin and then is all hard piped below the dam before it's outletted into the Wisconsin River.
Yeah, and I think I'm good with that, if for no other reason than because there's going to be green space installed that will replace impervious surface, and so that would affect increase the attenuation potential, correct?
Correct.
Right.
Yep. You're going to have I mean, like right now you've got green space behind the Fox. We have seen some resolve to the Q Gallery flooding issue because nothing is now being shot off the roof and down the pipes and into the alley that was there before. So we have seen some of the stormwater be infiltrated into where the green space is. So, you will have some of that. Now, some of this green space will be paved as part of the project for that event space, decorative concrete, things of that nature. The area back here on the north side of the property itself will be green space, and that will help continue to address some of the stormwater issues that we've run into in this area.
Thank you, Commissioner Arnson. Any other thoughts, comments, or a motion?
I'd move to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Arnson. We have a second?
I'll second Kneebone here.
Seconded by Kneebone. Discussion?
I just have a quick comment. I went to a bar restaurant in Minneapolis that had a second floor open air deck, and they put a little bocce ball court on there. That might be a good thing to do with a little bit of green space in there.
On the second floor deck?
Yeah, they somehow had a second floor bocce surface, and
That
it
sounds
was pretty
dangerous.
slick. You could just sit and watch people, or rent a court. But it was very cool. They had this big outdoor deck, and so I'm thinking, if you had green space in there anyway, they could turn that into a little bocce court.
On the main level, I think
something.
that's a good idea. Second level, not so sure.
Yeah, no, this one down here where the easement's going to be. So I thought that was a really clever use of that space that this bar had. I don't know the name of it. It's been many years ago, but it was very popular.
Nice. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Commissioners, please take yourselves off of mute. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? And that is approved. For Commissioner Arntz's sake and any others, I'm just giving a little extra time for those nay votes. All right. Item number 7 is a discussion only on the removal of a conditional use permit requirement for reduced setbacks in the traditional neighborhood development overlay district and allow two-family residential uses to implement the traditional overlay standards. Director.
Okay, so we're going to go back in time to 2001 a little bit. And in 2001, the state of Wisconsin passed the comprehensive plan smart growth law, essentially saying that, okay, every municipality has to have a comprehensive plan if they don't already. And then they also have to implement some type of traditional development districts that would allow municipalities to continue to develop, especially the core areas of their communities more traditionally, not suburb-esque, but really what you see in what I'll call our core districts, districts 1, a little bit of 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 9. And so through that, and being in this role for about a year now and talking to previous zoning administrator Kyle Kearns, it's a really, what we have now is a traditional neighborhood overlay zoning district, which says if you're a single family residential property and you want to do an addition, or if you want to have an accessory structure like a detached garage or a shed, you're allowed to develop those things closer to the side lot line, rear lot line, or the street lot line, provided you obtain a conditional use permit. Through that process itself allows, we say, okay, go conditional use permit, go through the public hearing process, go in front of plan commission, city council, and then develop the property, as long as the commission and council approved your conditional use permit. What we found is, and my experience has been the last year or so, is that a lot of people who may have an interest in doing like an attached deck in the front or porch or an addition to the back of their home are pretty skittish by the idea of doing the conditional use permit process, and actually leads a lot of folks to changing their plans significantly. Instead of going through the process, they'll say, okay, maybe we'll just do a smaller porch, or we'll not even add a porch to the front of the home. We'll try to do a detached deck somewhere in the back, as an example. And that's really, if you look at the city's comprehensive plan and our housing study, we want to reduce red tape. We want to reduce barriers to folks in investing in our core neighborhoods. These neighborhoods were primarily developed in the 18 and early 1900s. Older homes, most of them are right up against either right of way or right up against existing setback requirements. And again, it only is allowed for those who are single and two family. So if you look here, R2 and R3, which is the primary dominant zoning district in this area for residential, front yard setbacks for both are 25 feet. Side yard setbacks for the R2 are 20 feet on both sides, not less than 8. And I can get into the math on how you figure that one out if you really want. Otherwise, the rear yard setback, not less than 20% of the lot depth, but not less than 15 feet. R3, minimum of 7.5 feet on each side. So you typically would get a higher density, whereas the R2 says you need 20 feet on both sides. The R3 says 15 feet essentially on both sides works. Now the traditional neighborhood development district, it's 12 feet from the front yard, 4 feet from the side yard, and 15 feet from the rear yard. And the 15 foot has nothing to do with the depth of the lot itself. Again, remember that a lot of these homes were at the time modestly built on smaller lots in walkable neighborhoods that have access to the downtown, the river, some of these historic amenities. And unfortunately, some of these neighborhoods have fallen into disrepair. I think part of the reason is truly some of the challenges of our 1979 zoning code, which we still follow. And then, of course, the influx of students and student housing within some of our districts, especially those in District 3. So as we look and encourage people to invest in our core neighborhoods, are there ways for us to incrementally reduce the red tape required for these types of investments? And this was one of the things that staff has identified internally that we believe is consistent with what's identified in our comprehensive plan and our housing study. And so that's what's before you tonight. Is there an interest by the Plan Commission on changing these rules and regulations and allowing a reduced setback as opposed to going through the conditional use process? If there is, staff will then draft up an ordinance, bring it back for the October Plan Commission, and send it through its process. If there's not, we'll put this one back in the box and forget about it. So that's really what's here tonight. You've got a number of things outlined in the staff report that's in your agenda packet. I'm more than happy to answer any questions or offer suggestions as we go through this, but I really wanted to get the Plan Commission's opinion first.
Thank you, Director. Let's go to the public first. Any comments from the public?
I have a question.
Alder Jennings, yes.
I'm just having a little, I mean, I tend to be in favor of zero setbacks or reducing setbacks. I just, because this is the core area where setbacks are already pretty reduced, could you sort of describe a little bit more visually what you're talking about, or an example, or how this zoning change will physically look in the future? I mean, what's an example? I just need more of a visual of this, if you don't mind.
Director?
So, yeah, essentially, we have a number of homes that meet the front yard setback requirements. We have more homes that are closer to the street than what is typically allowed in our current zoning code. And so what this would do would be encourage folks to maybe do a porch addition or add on to the living room in the front of their home and bring that closer to the street, for example, or closer to the neighboring lot. I will say, as it relates to side yard setbacks, you're a little more limited, because if you're on a 50-foot wide lot and your house is 35 feet wide and you have a driveway going to the back of your lot, you're not going to be cutting off your driveway in order to add on. You're going to be adding on either to the back of the home or the front of the home if you're able. And so, in 50 or 75 years, what does the zoning code change look like? It's going to bring more of that activity closer to the street right of way. Will hypothetically start framing the street a little bit more traditionally, as opposed to having a significant front yard setback like 25 feet, or in some instances 30 or 35 feet. So I think you're going to see more of that. My hope too is that some of these homes that are beyond the life of, the life cycle of the home, as those homes in the next decade or two become raised and replaced, that we allow new homes to be developed more traditionally under the neighborhood. Let's say you're on Clark Street, and a Clark Street home gets torn down and replaced with a new home. We want that new home to more blend in with the neighborhood, and that may include reducing the setback. So instead of being 25 feet, maybe the applicant wants to push it 18 or 15 feet from the right of way. And that would be allowed just as a permitted use under kind of what staff is hoping here, as opposed to going through the conditional use process to build a new home in our traditional neighborhood. So long-term, hopefully it brings newer homes to the area, brings things closer to the street, you see a reinvestment with some front yard activity like porches or additions to living rooms or dining rooms, which in our traditional homes are typically in the front of the house.
Okay,
This is Commissioner Haynes. I have a question.
go ahead.
So you're talking about keeping the traditional overlay district. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, with these, and so then it will just be a permitted use. And then we'll have, so the regular setbacks and these traditional ones.
Correct. So you would be able to, and I can go here to the zoning map here. Anything
Commissioner
that falls
Haynes, are
within-
you able to see the zoning map?
I can see it.
Okay. Just
So-
people on phone probably won't be able to see this.
anything that falls within the black box currently is within the traditional neighborhood overlay district. So you would have the opportunity, if you built a home on 4th Avenue, for example, to develop it, I think more specific to the standards of traditional development without having to go through the conditional use process. There was some brief conversation internally was, well, what if we just create a whole new zoning district and reduce the setbacks? And we thought, well, we like having the kind of this layered zoning because it provides more opportunities and further incentivizes folks to maybe reinvest in the core and live in the core, as opposed to, some of our more suburban districts.
Okay. So how would people know that this alternative existed? I don't know how they know about it now. I can see why the conditional use permit is a barrier.
Yeah. Well, so when they get a permit to build an addition or a deck or some other feature, we look that stuff up and then we notify them whether or not they meet the setbacks or if they need a conditional use.
Yeah. So typically someone will come in, they want to build a garage or they want to build an addition to their home. One of the first things that they'll do is they'll meet with our zoning administrator and ask, okay, how far off the property line do we need to be? And in fact, anytime we issue a building permit, for those types of things, it goes through Adam and does zoning review as well. But we would inform them, you have the opportunity, if you so wish, to go to a reduced setback, but you don't have to in that case. Again, when we have these conversations and people say, yeah, I'm really interested in doing that, then we have to remind them, well, you have to go through the conditional use process. And that's something that I would say 9 times out of 10 people will avoid doing because they don't want to go through that process itself. So this we let them know that there's opportunities to, through the traditional neighborhood overlay zoning district, you can have a reduced setback. However, we would just work with them and inform them. That's part of the education component of what we do in community development.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Bob,
Mr. Weir, go ahead.
I tried to get a hold of Director Kanowski a couple times, Friday and today again, but didn't. My concern would be that if we allow the conditional use setback standards without a conditional use permit, then there's no need really for setback requirements listed in R2 and R3, provided the structure is within that box. Within that box, you have downtown historic review area. You also have a designated historic site being Clark Street from Division down to, I believe, Fremont. And if there's no requirement for conditional use permits, people are going, potentially are going to put extensions on their property, their current footprint, and go within 4 feet of the neighbor's property line or 12 feet from the street. And also that they potentially then are going to start constructing accessory buildings within 1 foot of the property line. And the neighbors, although the neighbors don't own that property, the neighbors should in fact have some say, or the ability to have some say, in whether an extension on a footprint of the neighbor's property is going to impact their property disproportionately. So I would strongly recommend that, although the, extending the traditional neighborhood overlay reduce setbacks to 3-family, or correction, two family, R3, that's a good move. But to allow then anybody that lives within that black blocks to be able to just go ahead regardless of what the standards are in the ordinance as far as R2 and R3 setback requirements, just allow them to disregard what's in the ordinance and say, okay, I'm going to go 12 feet from the street, or I'm going to go 4 feet from my neighbor's property, or I'm going to put a detached garage or a shop or whatever 1 foot from the neighbor's property line without any sort of review, or to make changes down on the historic district on Clark Street as an example, or the historically significant or at least architecturally significant properties throughout this district. You're going to start impacting on the neighbors without any sort of review or any, granted, the neighbors should have some say.
Mr. Ware, if you could summarize your comments, please.
Pardon?
If you could summarize your comments.
Those are my comments.
Thank you, sir. Commissioners, thoughts?
Yeah,
This
Alder
is
Nebo.
discussion only, so we're not looking for action at all. We're just looking for input.
It seems to me anything that we can do to encourage single or owner occupied housing in our core is a good thing. And I remember my parents, when I was first born, lived on a 3rd floor flat type thing, cheek to jowl next to the 2 flat next to him in Madison. In a lot of big cities, you don't have a lot of setback in between houses. Sometimes it's barely enough for a person to walk through. I don't see that that's going to be a big deal. I think we want to encourage people to live in the core, and this is a good way to do it, to allow people to make their houses functional for them without having to jump through a lot of hoops. They're still going to have to go through a building review process. I mean, that all will, the permit process will still bring some of that out. But, if somebody wants to put a porch on a house on Clark Street, I think that's a great idea.
Thank you. Any other comments from the commissioners?
This is Cooper. I would be in favor of the change.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity, this is Arnson. What does the conditional use permit cost?
$300, non-refundable.
Okay. And I'm somewhat familiar with what all goes into a conditional use application, and that could be, with $300 and a bunch of bothers, do you need to get an architectural design and all that? That could be real cost, as opposed to just being given the go-ahead to kind of build what you want to build.
So a few things. Single, 2, and technically 3 family are subject to UDC or Universal Dwelling Code requirements. Anything over 3 unit would require like a commercial architect to sign off on plans. What staff is generally thinking is single and 2 family would be allowed to kind of deviate from the traditional 1979 zoning code. As it relates to Mr. Weir's comment about like an accessory structure, staff's proposal is only the principal structure. I do have reservations, and I do agree with Mr. Weir that I think if a 24 by 30 foot detached garage is going to be a foot from my property line, I'm going to want to have some input, and I think that's fair to have that go through the conditional use process itself. But as it relates to the principal structure, I think that there's still enough setbacks from the side lot lines and the rear lot line that you won't be impacting the neighbors any more than what's typically done. As an example, I live within this traditional neighborhood overlay, and my house is 4 feet from my property line, and my neighbor's house is 3 feet from the property line, and there's still plenty of room for me to get my mower and whatever else in there. Just like as a real life example, the Clark Street Historic District is still a local historically significant district. Anything that would be done to those properties would still have to go through the proper reviews through historic preservation as well. So the historic comments from Mr. Weir, I think, while important, are rather irrelevant to this specific conversation because we do have that process already in place.
Okay, any other comments?
Just Commissioner Hoppy, and I would support it as well and kind of echo some of the comments from Director Kronosky as well. I live in this neighborhood, and yeah, I think there would be some opportunity to push some living space towards the street, which I think would be beneficial for a lot of people and bring more of that neighborhood. Because my house is set back, and a lot of houses are set back kind of on the street. I am too, but I could see kind of some, porches and decks and things like that closer, which would maybe bring the neighborhood closer and some other, be a positive aspect.
Thank you. Any other comments? Commissioner?
Yeah, Arnson, it wasn't clear when I read this that this proposed change was just to the principal structure. Is that the way it is?
Yep.
Yep, if you look in the staff memo, there's no mention of the accessory structure, and I guess that was, from staff's perspective, rather implied, but it should have been clearly identified. My apologies.
All right. That issue about building an accessory structure 1 foot, that would still go through the conditional use process.
Yeah, I think when you start getting closer to lot lines, you start impacting a property's ability to, a good example is we have drainage issues in some of these districts. And if your property that you have currently serves as a quasi drainage area for your neighboring property, yeah, it's unfortunate for you. But if all of a sudden you build a berm and you put a garage on top of that berm that's a foot off of the property line, those are all things that can be reviewed by this body, and we can say, hey, we want you to build this garage, but a foot off the property line is not going to work, maybe 4 feet off if that's going to work. So you have additional infiltration as an example. A lot of times also we talk about roof overhangs. No one builds an accessory structure without some type of overhang. And so, a lot of times those hang over a foot or two from the building wall itself. And so that's something we also would take into consideration. Does it make sense? Maybe even if you have a 6-inch overhang, do we really want to be a foot off of the property line? It gives the Plan Commission still a lot of authority over how detached structures, which will impact surrounding properties even more than a principal structure, are developed within the traditional neighborhood.
All right, then, Mrs. Arnson, I guess I agree with the idea too.
Okay, good. Any other comments? Okay, I'm just gonna make a quick statement here. I think this is probably a good idea. Not only will it save property owners a little bit of money not having to go through that conditional use permit, it streamlines things a little bit better and it encourages improvements on those properties within the traditional neighborhood overlay. My property, of course, is affected as well. I think my property, my house is a little closer to my neighbor's property line, and I know my neighbor's house is a little closer to my property line than 3 feet. Regardless, it's going to encourage that ownership enhancement, I guess, of the property. So I think this is a good idea. We'll have the director draft something up for future consideration by this body. Director, any final comments on that item? Otherwise, we'll move right into your director's report.
No other comments. So with that, I did include a physical report this month. It's just becoming easier for me to just put my thoughts down on paper as opposed to spewing them out in the middle of a meeting. So I did include that as well. If you have any questions or comments, or I'm more than happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'm seeking approval of my report.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments on the director's report? If not, I would entertain a motion to accept the director's report and place it on file.
Well, I just kind of comment that, and this is Arnson, I like the report, and I'd make a motion to approve if that's appropriate.
Thank you. We have a motion to accept the report and place it on file. Is there a second?
Haynes will
I'll
second.
Haynes will second. Any discussion there? And for the last time this evening, commissioners, take yourself off of mute. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Seeing none, the director's report is accepted and placed on file. Our agenda is exhausted and we stand adjourned at 7:20. Everyone have a good evening.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.